Who the hell do you think you are, strolling in here like you own the place?" The voice, dripping with venom and entitlement, sliced through the quiet hum of the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's first-class lounge. Rick Sterling, the airport's operations manager, planted his feet directly in the path of an impeccably dressed black man. Rick's face, a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust, was a prelude to the storm he was about to unleash. Dr. Julian Vance stopped, his polished leather shoes silent on the gleaming marble floor. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath. Business travelers paused their phone calls. The soft clinking of coffee cups ceased. A sea of smartphones emerged from pockets and purses, their lenses turning to capture the unfolding drama. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a public spectacle, and everyone was about to have a front-row seat. "This lounge is for paying customers," Rick snarled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, his words a deliberate act of public humiliation. He stabbed a finger toward the crowded general seating area visible through the glass partition. "Not for street trash looking for a handout. Get your ass back out there before I have security drag you out." Dr. Vance remained a pillar of calm, his composure a stark contrast to Rick's boiling rage. This infuriating stillness only seemed to fuel the manager's fury. Rick stepped closer, invading Julian's personal space, his breath hot with anger. "Are you deaf, boy? I said move, now!" But as Julian Vance made a subtle, almost imperceptible adjustment to his tailored jacket, something glinted under the recessed lighting of the lounge. It was a small, official-looking insignia on his lanyard, a detail Rick Sterling was far too consumed by his racist tirade to notice. It was a detail that was about to transform this ugly scene of public degradation into the single most catastrophic, career-ending mistake of his entire life. Before we witness the self-destruction of a man blinded by hate, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You are about to see an act of justice so swift and so absolute, you won't want to miss a single, satisfying second. Have you ever watched someone's hatred become so powerful it drives them to commit a federal crime, right on camera for the whole world to see? The tension from Rick Sterling's outburst was a palpable thing, a toxic cloud hanging over the gate. But this public humiliation was just the opening act. What the passengers, with their phones held aloft, didn't know was that Rick had been meticulously planning something far more sinister than just verbal abuse. The airport's security cameras, silent, unblinking eyes in the ceiling, had recorded it all. Earlier that morning, at precisely 6:15 a.m., the footage showed Rick Sterling entering the airport's evidence storage room. The timestamp, a small detail in the corner of the screen, would later become the nail in his coffin. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew the system, his steps purposeful. He knew exactly what he was looking for among the rows of sealed and tagged items confiscated from recent arrests. His fingers deftly located a small plastic baggie. Inside was a white powder. Cocaine, seized from a drug mule 3 weeks prior. With a furtive glance around the empty room, he slipped the baggie into the inner pocket of his manager's jacket. In his twisted mind, this wasn't a crime. It was a tool for civic hygiene, a way to cleanse his airport of what he considered undesirable elements. People need to learn their place, he had muttered to the silence, a chilling declaration of his warped worldview, completely oblivious to the fact that his every move was being digitally immortalized. Meanwhile, Dr. Julian Vance had arrived at ATL for a reason that was the polar opposite of Rick's malicious intent. As a senior aviation safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, with over 15 years of decorated service, he was there to conduct an unannounced top-to-bottom compliance review of the airport's security protocols. His standard-issue carry-on bag wasn't filled with personal effects, but with the tools of his trade. Digital testing devices, precision measurement tools, and reams of official documentation. Julian had built a formidable reputation on two unshakable pillars: thoroughness and professionalism. Today's surprise inspection had been triggered by an alarming spike in formal complaints filed against the airport, complaints that all pointed to a disturbing pattern of discriminatory treatment of passengers. The profound irony that he was about to become a first-hand victim of the very bigotry he was there to investigate wasn't lost on him. Rick returned to the terminal floor, the planted evidence in his pocket feeling like a warm, secret promise of a confrontation he was eager to initiate. This wasn't his first rodeo, not the evidence planting, but the harassment. It was his signature move. There had been complaints, of course. 17 formal grievances in the last 3 years alone, each one systematically buried by an airport administration that prized Rick's firm hand and aggressive management style over the comfort and civil rights of its passengers. Eliza Torres, the airport's security chief, had seen the storm clouds gathering. She had tried to warn them. "He's a lawsuit waiting to happen. A major incident just looking for a place to explode," she had told the airport director just last month in a closed-door meeting. Her concerns were brushed aside, dismissed as oversensitivity, as a failure to appreciate the tough realities of airport security. So when Rick Sterling spotted Dr. Julian Vance walking toward the first-class area, every racist stereotype and prejudiced assumption in his poisoned mind fired at once. To him, Julian's expensive suit, confident stride, and leather briefcase didn't signify success. They signified a threat, someone who didn't belong. Here was his chance, he thought, to prove his instincts were right, to make an example of someone. In the warped logic of his bigotry, he wasn't being a racist. He was being a protector, a guardian of the airport's sanctity. "Chloe," Rick called out to Chloe Martinez, the gate agent who was preparing for the first morning departure to Chicago. "Keep an eye on that situation over there. We might have a problem." Chloe looked over, her expression one of confusion. She saw a distinguished, well-dressed man who looked like every other business traveler she checked in daily. Nothing about Dr. Vance suggested trouble. But Rick was her boss, and he was already on the move, his hand instinctively patting the jacket pocket where his planted proof awaited. He had perfected his method over the years. Create a public distraction, manufacture a flimsy excuse for probable cause, then escalate the situation until he got the result he wanted. Usually that meant humiliating someone until they voluntarily left, their dignity in tatters. But today felt different. Today, Rick had decided to take it all the way. Julian, completely unaware of the elaborate setup he was walking into, continued his professional duties. He was making a quiet, preliminary observation of the airport's operations. He noted the positioning of security cameras, the interactions between staff members, the patterns of passenger flow. From a compliance standpoint, everything seemed to be in order. But he had already witnessed one deeply concerning interaction: the airport manager who had just verbally assaulted him, a man clearly in a position of authority, wearing an official airport management badge. Julian made a careful mental note. This incident would be a centerpiece of his report. Discriminatory behavior by airport staff wasn't just poor customer service. It was a serious federal violation that could lead to crippling penalties. As the 8:30 a.m. flight to Chicago began boarding, Rick positioned himself strategically near the gate, his eyes fixed on Julian with the focused intensity of a predator stalking its prey. Inside his pocket, his fingers traced the outline of the plastic baggie. "Time to take out the trash," Rick whispered to himself, his chest swelling with a sense of righteous purpose. He was utterly, fatally confident that his actions would be lauded by the administration, that he would be seen as a hero. He had absolutely no idea that the thug he was about to frame was a high-ranking federal inspector with the authority to shut down his entire airport. The early morning sun streamed through the massive terminal windows, as Rick began his deliberate walk toward Julian, his hand already reaching into his pocket. The security cameras continued their silent, impartial recording, capturing every single step of what was about to become a federal crime. The trap was set. The evidence was ready. And Rick Sterling was about to make the most catastrophic mistake of his life. Rick approached Julian with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed he was above the law, a king in his own concrete and glass kingdom. What happened next would be captured not just by the airport's unblinking security cameras, but by dozens of passenger cell phones, creating an undeniable multi-angle record of one of the most brazen acts of evidence planting ever caught on video. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," Rick announced, his voice booming across the gate area, intentionally drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." Julian looked up from the notes he was making on his tablet, his expression remaining one of professional neutrality. "I'm sorry, what reports? I've been standing right here reviewing documents for the last 10 minutes. "Don't play dumb with me," Rick sneered, stepping even closer, his presence an intimidating force. His voice dripped with the contempt of a man who savored his power over others. "I know your type. You're probably casing the place, looking for what you can steal, or worse." The racist insinuation was as thick and toxic as smoke. Passengers who had been idly chatting fell silent, their heads turning, sensing the confrontation was escalating into something ugly. Chloe Martinez looked up from her computer terminal at the gate, her face a mask of discomfort. Several travelers, like Mark Stafford, a businessman waiting for the Chicago flight, instinctively knew this was a moment that needed to be recorded. "This doesn't feel right," he whispered to his wife, his thumb already pressing the record button on his phone. "That airport guy is way out of line." More people gathered, a silent audience drawn by the magnetic pull of conflict. Rick seemed to thrive on the attention, his chest puffing out with a grotesque self-importance. "Listen, boy," Rick continued, his voice growing louder, more condescending, each word a calculated insult. "I've been working at airports for 12 years. I can spot trouble from a mile away, and you reek of it." Julian remained calm, but his highly trained eye was already cataloging the procedural violations in Rick's approach. This was not standard security protocol, not even close. "Sir, I'm going to need to speak with your supervisor. This entire interaction seems highly irregular." "My supervisor?" Rick let out a short, mocking laugh. "I am the supervisor here, genius. Rick Sterling, Airport Operations Manager, and right now you're my problem to solve." The crowd was growing larger now, a semicircle of silent witnesses. "Sir, I'm going to have to search your bag," Rick declared, his voice taking on the theatrical quality of someone performing for an audience. "Airport security protocols. You look like the type who might be carrying something you shouldn't be." Julian's professional training took over. He had dealt with hostile and uncooperative individuals before, but this level of overt, aggressive profiling was something he'd only read about in case studies. "I am happy to cooperate with a lawful search," he said, his voice even and steady. "But I would like to see your written authorization for this search. Standard protocol requires documented reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion?" Rick's face twisted into a mask of mock surprise. "How's this for reasonable suspicion? You don't belong here, you're acting nervous, and frankly, people like you are usually up to no good." The collective discomfort of the crowd was now a palpable force. Passengers exchanged shocked glances. This wasn't just a rude employee. This was raw, unapologetic racism playing out in real time. "I don't need authorization from someone like you," Rick continued, jabbing a finger toward Julian's chest. "My authorization is your suspicious behavior and the fact that you're clearly in the wrong place. Now open the damn bag, or I'll have security drag you out of here in cuffs." Just then, Eliza Torres, the security chief, arrived, her radio crackling. A concerned gate agent had called her. She took in the scene. The growing crowd, the sea of recording phones, Rick's aggressive posture, with a sinking feeling of dread. "Rick," she said carefully, her voice low, "what's the situation here?" "I've got a suspicious individual refusing to comply with security procedures," Rick announced grandly, playing his part to the hilt. "Probably carrying contraband. You know how these people operate." Julian, realizing that any resistance would only be used against him, carefully placed his carry-on bag on a nearby chair. "I will comply with your request," he said, his voice loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. "But I insist that this entire process is documented and witnessed. This interaction is highly irregular." "Oh, it'll be documented all right," Rick said with a smirk that would later become a key piece of evidence against him in federal court. "We're going to document exactly what kind of criminal you really are. As Julian unzipped his bag, Rick positioned himself to the side, his body language a study in feigned professionalism. The bag's contents were sophisticated: digital measurement devices, atmospheric testing apparatus, official forms embossed with a federal letterhead. To an untrained, prejudiced eye like Rick's, the equipment could look unusual, even suspicious. His heart was pounding with a cocktail of adrenaline and anticipation. This was his moment of vindication. This was where he would prove to everyone that his instincts, his gut feelings about people, were always right. As Julian lifted out a device to explain its function, Rick saw his opening. "What the hell is all this junk?" Rick demanded, rummaging roughly through the meticulously organized bag. "Looks like burglar tools to me, or maybe some kind of drug manufacturing equipment." "These are professional testing instruments for aviation safety," Julian explained patiently. "I can show you the documentation for each piece." "Documentation?" Rick cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Criminals always have fake documentation. That's crime 1001, buddy." The humiliation was systematic, a deliberate dismantling of Julian's professionalism. Rick was savoring every second, genuinely believing he was a hero, protecting innocent travelers from a dangerous man. Then, he made his move. "And what's this?" he exclaimed suddenly, his hand darting into the bag. In one swift, fluid motion, he dropped the small plastic baggie he'd been concealing among Julian's equipment. He immediately discovered it, his fingers clumsily fumbling with the baggie, ensuring his own fingerprints would contaminate the planted evidence. "Well, well, well," Rick announced triumphantly, holding the baggie of white powder aloft for the entire crowd to see. "Look what we have here, folks. Our so-called innocent passenger is carrying drugs. Cocaine, by the looks of it." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. More phones came out, every lens focused on Rick's moment of apparent triumph. Julian's face registered genuine shock, not the panicked guilt of a man who had been caught, but the utter disbelief of a man witnessing an impossible, surreal situation unfold before his very eyes. "That is not mine," Julian said firmly, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "I have never seen that substance before in my life." "Sure you haven't," Rick mocked, playing to his audience like a seasoned performer on a stage. "That's what they all say when they get caught red-handed. Probably thought you could smuggle this through security in your fancy briefcase, didn't you?" The planted evidence was now the centerpiece of Rick's grotesque performance. He held it up like a trophy, basking in what he believed was his moment of ultimate vindication. What would you have done if you were in Dr. Vance's shoes? How would you maintain your composure when being so publicly framed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this story as unbelievable as I am, do me a favor and smash that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people. "You know what this tells me?" Rick continued, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "This tells me my instincts were 100% right. I spotted you the moment you walked into my terminal, acting like you owned the place. Well, guess what? The only place you're going to own is a jail cell. Julian's training in crisis management kept his exterior perfectly composed, but internally, his mind was a steel trap, documenting every word, every action, every detail of this extraordinary violation of procedure and civil rights. "Sir," Julian said clearly, his voice carrying to the crowd of witnesses, "I need to state for the record that evidence has just been planted in my bag. I request an immediate documentation of the chain of custody, chemical testing of that substance, and a full review of all relevant security footage." Rick laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the gate area. "Listen to this guy. Chain of custody. Security footage. You've been watching too much TV, buddy. This isn't a TV show. This is real life. And in real life, drug dealers go to prison." The systematic humiliation continued as Rick turned to address the onlookers. "This is exactly why we have these security protocols, folks," he announced, like a politician at a rally. "People like this think they can just walk into our airport and conduct their illegal business. Well, not on my watch." At that moment, Officer Mike Chen of the airport police arrived, summoned by Rick's earlier call. He surveyed the scene, the agitated manager, the calm and collected black man, the crowd of recording phones, the visible tension, with the practiced eye of an officer who had seen far too many airport confrontations. "What's the situation here?" Chen asked professionally. "I caught this man red-handed with drugs in his bag," Rick announced proudly, still holding up the planted evidence like a prize. "Classic smuggling operation. Probably has more stashed somewhere else. These people always travel in packs." Julian looked directly at Officer Chen, his demeanor subtly shifting, becoming more authoritative. "Officer, I need to inform you that I am a federal employee conducting official business. The substance in question has been planted in my bag, and I have multiple witnesses who can attest to that fact." "Witnesses," Rick scoffed. But for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Nobody saw me plant anything because I didn't plant anything. You're the one with the drugs, not me. Stop trying to confuse the situation with your lies." But Mark Stafford, the businessman, stepped forward, his phone still recording. "Actually," he said, his voice firm, "I've got the whole thing on video. I saw exactly what happened, and it's all right here." The color began to drain from Rick Sterling's face. His moment of triumph was starting to fracture around the edges, but his deep-seated arrogance wouldn't let him back down. "I don't care what some tourist thinks he saw," Rick declared, waving a dismissive hand. "The evidence speaks for itself. Drugs in his bag, case closed." But Officer Chen was now looking more carefully at Julian, noting his professional attire, his unnaturally calm responses, and his specific knowledge of legal procedures. "Sir," Chen said to Julian, "you mentioned you're a federal employee. Can you elaborate on that?" "I am Senior Aviation Safety Inspector Julian Vance, Federal Aviation Administration, badge number 771B, Julian replied with quiet, unshakable authority. "I am here conducting an unannounced compliance inspection of this facility under federal mandate." The words, federal, inspector, FAA, mandate, hit Rick Sterling like a physical blow. Suddenly, everything made a horrible, catastrophic kind of sense. And in that one sickening moment of clarity, Rick Sterling knew his career hadn't just ended. It had been spectacularly, irrevocably obliterated. The revelation that Julian Vance was a federal inspector should have been the end of it. It should have been the moment Rick Sterling shut his mouth, apologized, and prayed for a merciful end to his career. Instead, his toxic blend of racism and arrogance drove him to double down, digging his own grave deeper and transforming his terrible mistakes into a series of federal crimes with devastating consequences. "Federal inspector?" Rick's laugh was strained, a high-pitched, almost manic sound. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England. You really think I'm going to fall for that old trick?" Officer Chen looked between the two men, his hand hovering over his radio. the situation having just escalated from a potential drug bust to something far more complex and dangerous. But Rick wasn't backing down. "Listen, Chen," Rick continued, his voice taking on the tone of a superior officer, a tone he was used to people obeying. "I've been managing security at this airport for 12 years. I know a con artist when I see one. This guy's probably got fake credentials, a fake ID, the whole 9 yards. These drug dealers are getting more sophisticated every day." Julian remained remarkably calm, a beacon of professionalism in a storm of hysteria. "Officer Chen, I understand this is an unusual situation. I need to contact my supervisor at the FAA regional office immediately. This situation is now actively interfering with a federal investigation." "Federal investigation?" Rick's voice cracked, but he bulldozed forward. "What's next? You going to tell us you're with the CIA? The FBI? Give me a break." Eliza Torres, the security chief, stepped closer to Officer Chen. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "maybe we should verify his credentials before this goes any further." "Verify what?" Rick snapped, turning on her. "Eliza, don't let him manipulate you. I caught him with drugs. That's all the verification we need." But Mark Stafford was still recording, and his businessman's instincts were screaming that something was deeply wrong with the manager's behavior. "Officer," he said again, "I have everything on video. The way this manager found that baggie. It was clear as day. He put it in there." Rick spun around, his face flushed with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about. I didn't plant anything. This drug dealer is trying to frame me now." "Wait." "Sir," Officer Chen said to Rick, his voice now firm. "I need you to calm down. We're going to sort this out by the book." But Rick was spiraling, losing control. His authority was being questioned in public. His actions were being recorded. His entire worldview was crumbling around him. "I am calm," Rick shouted, his voice echoing, betraying the truth of his statement. "I'm the one trying to protect this airport from criminals, and everyone is acting like I'm the problem." Julian spoke again, his voice cutting through Rick's tirade with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Officer Chen, I am going to provide you with my supervisor's direct contact number. Her name is Director Evelyn Reed, FAA Southern Region. She can verify my identity and my mission here within 5 minutes. The specificity of the information, the name, the title, the region, gave Officer Chen a moment of serious pause. Real criminals didn't usually provide the direct line to a federal director. "You know what?" Rick said desperately, grasping at straws. "Even if you are some kind of federal employee, that doesn't change the fact that you had drugs in your bag. Maybe you're a dirty federal agent. Maybe this is an inside job." The accusation was so ludicrous, so outrageous, that several passengers in the crowd audibly gasped. Chloe Martinez at the gate looked utterly mortified by her supervisor's meltdown. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, trying to intervene. "Maybe we should—" "Stay out of this, Martinez!" Rick barked, his authority now a weapon of pure desperation. "I don't need advice from a gate agent on how to handle a major security threat." Julian's patience was extraordinary, but his next words carried the unmistakable weight of federal law. "Officer Chen, I must inform you that interference with a federal inspector in the performance of their duties is a federal crime under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. At this point, I am officially requesting immediate contact with my supervisor and complete documentation of every action that has occurred here." "Documentation?" Rick laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Fine. Let's document it all. Document how I caught a drug dealer who's now trying to hide behind a flimsy, fake federal identity." Officer Chen was already reaching for his radio, but Rick made his most catastrophic decision yet. "You know what? I don't care if you claim to be the Pope. The evidence is the evidence." He waved the planted baggie in the air, like a mad king waving his scepter. "Drugs in your bag. End of story. Chen, arrest him." "Sir," Officer Chen said carefully, "I think we need to verify—" "I am ordering you to arrest him." Rick's voice boomed through the terminal. "I am the airport operations manager, and I am telling you this man is a drug dealer and a threat to this airport." For the first time, Julian showed a flicker of emotion. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to pity. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice low, "you are making this situation exponentially worse for yourself." "Worse for me?" Rick's voice was reaching a fever pitch. "You're the one going to prison, buddy. You and whatever pathetic scam you're trying to run." But Officer Chen was already dialing the number Julian had provided. Within moments, he was speaking to FAA Director Evelyn Reed. Her voice, crisp and authoritative, could be heard clearly through the phone's speaker. "Inspector Vance is conducting an unannounced compliance review under federal mandate." Her voice carried through the silent gate area. "I need to be clear. Any interference with his duties constitutes a federal crime. I will be on site within the hour." The color drained completely from Rick Sterling's face as the crushing reality of his situation finally broke through his wall of denial. But even then, his arrogance fought a desperate rearguard action. "This is impossible," he whispered, his eyes locked on the phone in Officer Chen's hand. "This can't be real." But it was real. And Rick Sterling had just committed multiple unambiguous federal crimes, on camera, in front of dozens of witnesses, against a senior inspector from the Federal Aviation Administration. His career wasn't just over. His life as he knew it was about to be systematically dismantled. The phone call with FAA Director Evelyn Reed should have been Rick Sterling's wake-up call. Instead, it became the moment his entire world, built on a foundation of prejudice and abused power, collapsed in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. "Inspector Vance." Director Reed's voice came through Officer Chen's phone with crystal clarity, a voice that tolerated no nonsense. "What is your status? We've been expecting your preliminary report." Julian took the phone, his composure unshaken. "Director Reed, this is Inspector Vance, badge 771B. I am currently being unlawfully detained by airport personnel who have planted a foreign substance in my official inspection equipment." Rick's face contorted through a rapid series of emotions: disbelief, confusion, and then a desperate, last-ditch denial. "This is a fake," he announced to the crowd, which was now hanging on every word. "He's got accomplices. This is all staged." But Director Reed's next words cut through Rick's delusional rant like a laser. "Inspector Vance, you are authorized to complete your compliance review immediately. Officer Chen, this is Director Evelyn Reed, Federal Aviation Administration. Inspector Vance is conducting an unannounced safety and security inspection under Federal Mandate 14, CFR, Part 139. I repeat, any and all interference with his duties constitutes a federal crime." The sheer authority in her voice was unmistakable. Officer Chen straightened his posture instinctively, a sign of respect for a level of federal command he immediately recognized. "Ma'am, we have a situation here," Officer Chen began. "I am aware, officer," Reed replied curtly. "I am dispatching additional federal investigators to your location immediately. Preserve all evidence and document everything. And Officer Chen, you are to arrest anyone who continues to interfere with Inspector Vance's duties." Rick's legs felt like they might give out from under him. The small baggie of planted cocaine, which had felt like a key to his triumph moments before, now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his trembling hand. "This can't be happening," he muttered, but his voice was a hollow whisper, devoid of its earlier conviction. Julian calmly retrieved his official FAA credentials from his jacket pocket, the same credentials Rick had been too blinded by his own prejudice to even ask for. The badge was solid, official, and undeniable. The federal agency seal, the official photograph, Inspector Julian Vance's name, and his badge number were all clearly visible. As I was attempting to explain, Julian said with professional calm, his voice carrying a new weight. "I am here conducting a compliance inspection of your airport's security protocols. Specifically, I was tasked with investigating recent, credible reports of discriminatory treatment of passengers." The irony landed on the crowd of witnesses, like a physical blow. The federal inspector sent to investigate discrimination had just been subjected to the most egregious act of discrimination by the very person who was likely the source of the problem. Eliza Torres, the security chief, stared at the credentials in shock. "Inspector Vance," she stammered, We had no idea. Mr. Sterling never mentioned any federal inspection." "It's an unannounced inspection," Julian explained patiently. "That is standard protocol. It ensures we get an authentic assessment of day-to-day operations." Rick was still clutching the planted evidence, his hand shaking violently now. But you had drugs. I found drugs in your bag." Julian's expression remained professional, but there was a new steel in his voice. "Mr. Sterling, what you are holding is industrial-grade testing powder. It's used for calibrating our contraband detection equipment. It is standard FAA inspection material, clearly labeled as such in my official kit." Officer Chen took the baggie from Rick's limp hand and examined it more closely. Sure enough, printed in tiny letters that Rick had completely missed in his rush to plant the evidence, was a label. "FAA Official Testing Compound, not for unauthorized use." "Jesus Christ," Mark Stafford said from the crowd, his phone still recording. "He tried to frame a federal inspector with the inspector's own testing materials." The revelation sent a shockwave through the gathered passengers. Rick hadn't just planted evidence. He had unknowingly planted a piece of federal inspection equipment and tried to pass it off as illegal drugs. It was a level of incompetence so profound it was almost comical. Rick's world was spinning into a black hole of his own making. I didn't know," he stammered. "I thought he looked suspicious." "Suspicious how?" Julian asked quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "What, exactly, made me look suspicious to you, Mr. Sterling?" The question hung in the air, a loaded weapon pointed directly at Rick's bigotry. Everyone knew the answer, but forcing Rick to say it, to admit it, would seal his fate completely. You were in the first-class area and you—" Rick's voice trailed off as he realized any possible explanation would be a direct admission of racial profiling. "I was what, Mr. Sterling?" Julian pressed, his gaze unwavering. "Please, finish your sentence." Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. There was no way out. There was no way to explain his actions without admitting to the racial bias, the discrimination, and the evidence planting that everyone had just witnessed. Chloe Martinez, the gate agent, finally stepped forward, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and conviction. "Inspector Vance, I want to formally apologize on behalf of the airport. Mr. Sterling's behavior is completely unacceptable and not representative of all of us." "Ma'am," Julian replied with quiet dignity, "your apology is appreciated. But this isn't about a personal offense. This is about systemic violations of federal aviation safety protocols and fundamental civil rights law." Eliza Torres was mentally reviewing the timeline of events, and a look of dawning horror crossed her face. "Rick," she said, her voice sharp. "You took evidence from the storage room this morning. I have the access logs. You signed in at 6:15 a.m. Rick's face went ashen. The security chief had just drawn a direct, documented line between his early morning visit to the evidence room and the planted material. I was just checking inventory," Rick stammered weakly. "Checking inventory?" Eliza's voice was incredulous. "You removed a substance from an active case file and planted it on a federal inspector." The full magnitude of Rick's crimes was becoming terrifyingly clear to everyone present. Evidence tampering, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, civil rights violations. The list of federal charges was mounting by the minute. Julian calmly began removing his inspection equipment, holding each piece up for Officer Chen to see. Each one was clearly labeled with federal identification numbers. This is a digital measurement device for runway surface friction testing. This is atmospheric pressure calibration equipment. This is documentation for air carrier compliance verification. Every single item Rick had dismissed as burglar tools or drug equipment was standard, life-saving federal inspection gear, the kind of equipment that keeps airports safe for millions of passengers. "Inspector Vance," Officer Chen said formally, his voice filled with a newfound respect and apology. "I apologize for the delay in verifying your status. You are free to continue your inspection. Mr. Sterling, you need to come with me." Wait! Rick's voice cracked with desperation. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect the airport." "Protect it from what?" Julian asked with devastating calm. "From a federal safety inspection designed to keep your passengers safe." Rick had no answer. His racist assumptions had led him to attack the very person whose job it was to ensure the safety and integrity of his airport. He had committed multiple federal crimes in an attempt to stop an inspection that would have ultimately improved the airport's operations. Director Reed's voice came through Officer Chen's radio, loud and clear. "Inspector Vance, federal agents are en route to your location. Complete your inspection and document everything. Mr. Sterling and any supervisors who enabled his pattern of behavior will be the subject of a full federal investigation." As the first federal agents, clad in dark blue jackets with FBI emblazoned on the back, began arriving at the scene, Rick Sterling finally understood the true scope of his catastrophe. He hadn't just lost his job. He had committed federal crimes against a federal inspector while actively interfering with aviation safety protocols. The man he'd tried to humiliate and frame was now going to professionally and methodically complete his inspection. The evidence Rick had planted would be tested and traced directly back to him. The security footage would show his cold premeditation. And Dr. Julian Vance, the thug Rick had tried to destroy, would write the federal report that would ensure this never happened to anyone, ever again. Rick's career was over. His freedom was in jeopardy, and his victim was about to make the entire aviation industry safer for everyone. Within 90 minutes of Director Reed's phone call, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport had transformed from a busy travel hub into a federal crime scene. FBI agents, FAA investigators, and senior officials from the Department of Transportation swarmed the terminal, turning Rick Sterling's moment of racist triumph into a full-scale, multi-agency federal investigation that would shake the entire industry. Special Agent Ramirez of the FBI's Civil Rights Division arrived first, her calm, authoritative presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the entire situation. She surveyed the scene, the shell-shocked passengers giving statements, the cluster of airport staff, the man in handcuffs, with the practiced eye of someone who had investigated hate crimes across the nation. "Inspector Vance," she said, extending a hand professionally. "Agent Ramirez, FBI. I understand you've been the victim of evidence tampering and egregious civil rights violations." Julian shook her hand. "Agent Ramirez, thank you for responding so quickly. I have multiple witnesses, hours of security and cell phone footage, and the physical evidence of the crimes committed." Rick, who had been standing in a shocked, silent daze under Officer Chen's supervision, suddenly found his voice again, a pathetic echo of his earlier bravado. "Crimes? What crimes? I was doing my job. I was protecting the airport." Agent Ramirez turned to study Rick with the cold, clinical assessment of a federal prosecutor sizing up her prey. "Mr. Sterling, I presume. You are under arrest for evidence tampering, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Do you understand these charges?" Civil rights violations. Rick's voice cracked. I never violated anyone's civil rights. I treated him exactly like I'd treat anyone I thought was suspicious. Suspicious how? Agent Ramirez asked, pulling out a digital recorder and holding it up. Please explain, for the record, exactly what it was about Senior Inspector Vance that you found to be suspicious. Rick's mouth opened and closed as he stared into the abyss of the trap he had laid for himself. Any explanation of his suspicions would be a confession of racial profiling. He was in the wrong area, Rick said weakly. The first-class boarding lounge. Agent Ramirez consulted her notes. Inspector Vance was traveling on a first-class ticket, purchased for him by the Federal Aviation Administration for his official travel. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The revelation landed on Rick like another sledgehammer blow. Not only was Julian a federal inspector, but he legitimately belonged in the very space Rick had tried to eject him from. Every single assumption Rick had made was not just wrong, but criminally, demonstrably wrong. Eliza Torres approached Agent Ramirez, a thick file folder in her hands, her face grim with the weight of what she was about to reveal. Agent Ramirez, I've pulled Mr. Sterling's complete personnel file. There have been 17 formal complaints filed against him for discriminatory behavior in the past 3 years. Airport administration buried most of them. 17? Agent Ramirez's eyebrows shot up as she began flipping through the damning documentation. And what disciplinary action was taken in response to these 17 formal complaints? Verbal counseling, Eliza replied, her voice thick with disgust. Management said his aggressive security posture was a valuable asset for airport safety. They actually promoted him twice during that period. The file was a horror story of unchecked bigotry. Complaint after complaint from passengers, all telling the same story. Racial profiling, unnecessary searches, verbal harassment, and intimidation tactics. All of it documented. All of it ignored by an administration that had actively enabled his behavior. This passenger here, Agent Ramirez read from one complaint, describes being called boy and having his personal belongings scattered across the floor during an unwarranted bag search. Does that sound familiar, Mr. Sterling? Rick's face went pale. He remembered the incident. He remembered feeling powerful, justified in his actions. Now that memory was Exhibit A in a federal case against him. Director Evelyn Reed arrived with her own team of FAA investigators. Her expression was thunderous. She was accompanied by Dr. Alistair Finch from the Department of Transportation's Office of the Inspector General, whose presence signaled that this investigation had already reached the highest levels of federal transportation security. Inspector Vance, Director Reed said, her first concern for her agent. Are you injured? Do you require any medical attention? No, ma'am. I am fine, Julian replied. But I need to brief you on my preliminary observations during this incident. The security protocols at this facility are fundamentally compromised. Rick couldn't help himself. His arrogance flared up one last time, a dying ember in the face of his federal arrest. Compromised? I kept this airport safe for 12 years. I know how to spot trouble. I've prevented dozens of incidents. Director Reed turned to look at Rick with the expression of someone examining a particularly unpleasant insect under a microscope. Mr. Sterling, you just committed multiple federal felonies against my senior inspector while he was conducting an official safety review. Your judgment regarding what constitutes trouble is, evidently, completely and utterly worthless. Dr. Finch stepped forward, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had investigated catastrophic airport security failures across the nation. Mr. Sterling, your actions today have compromised the security of this entire facility. By successfully targeting and detaining a federal inspector, you have demonstrated to the world that this airport's security apparatus is fundamentally broken and susceptible to corruption from within. Agent Ramirez, meanwhile, was reviewing the security footage with the airport's technical staff. And what she found was even more damning than the incident itself. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to explain this video, time-stamped at 6:15 a.m. this morning, showing you removing an item from the evidence storage room." On the monitor, Rick's own image betrayed him. He could be seen clearly taking the baggie from the evidence locker, furtively checking to make sure no one was watching, and slipping it into his jacket pocket. But the footage revealed something even more sinister. According to the timeline, Agent Ramirez continued, her voice cold and methodical. "You removed this evidence a full 30 minutes before Inspector Vance even arrived at the airport. This shows clear, undeniable premeditation. You came to work today intending to frame someone." Rick's legs nearly gave out. The footage proved he hadn't just acted impulsively. He had planned this. He had come to the airport armed and ready to frame an innocent person before he even knew who his target would be. "I was checking inventory," Rick said weakly, the lie sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "Checking inventory?" Agent Ramirez's voice dripped with incredulity. "By removing seized narcotics from an active case file and placing it in your personal clothing? Is that standard inventory procedure here, Mr. Sterling?" The video evidence was a death blow, but Agent Ramirez wasn't finished. "This evidence locker's access log shows 17 unauthorized entries by you in the past 6 months alone. Mr. Sterling, how many other times have you planted evidence on innocent passengers?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. "And here," Agent Ramirez continued, advancing the footage from the gate camera, "we see you at 7:47 a.m., approaching Inspector Vance and deliberately, and quite clumsily, I might add, placing the evidence in his bag during your manufactured search." The crowd of passengers who had witnessed the incident were now giving formal statements to FBI agents. Mark Stafford handed over his cell phone video, which showed the planting from a perfect, unobstructed angle. But he wasn't the only one. Multiple other passengers came forward with their own recordings. The federal government now had a multi-angle, high-definition account of the same crime. Rick was finally beginning to understand that his situation was far worse than just losing his job. Federal charges meant federal prison. Civil rights violations carried heavy sentences. Evidence tampering could result in decades behind bars. "Look," Rick said desperately, sweat beading on his forehead. "Maybe I made some mistakes, but I honestly thought he was suspicious. I was trying to protect people. I've always put passenger safety first." "Protect them from what?" Director Reed asked sharply. "From a federal safety inspection? From the one person here whose job it is to make air travel safer for everyone?" Dr. Finch pulled out his own tablet, displaying data that made Rick's situation even worse. "Mr. Sterling, my office has been reviewing your detention statistics. In your 12 years as a manager here, you have initiated 247 passenger detentions. 89% of those detentions involved passengers of color. 78% of them resulted in no charges ever being filed. Do you see a pattern here?" The statistics were damning. Rick hadn't been protecting anyone. He had been systematically targeting minorities for harassment while likely letting actual security threats slip by unnoticed. Isaiah finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had been his shield throughout the entire ordeal. "Mr. Sterling, let me explain something to you. I have been an FAA inspector for 15 years. I have investigated airports across this country and around the world. I have seen security failures, equipment malfunctions, and operational deficiencies that could have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people." Rick listened, his head bowed, perhaps finally beginning to comprehend the true magnitude of what Julian Vance actually did for a living. "My job," Julian continued, "is to find the problems before they become disasters. And today, I found the single biggest problem this airport has. It's you, your racial bias, your abuse of authority, your willingness to commit federal crimes to target people you don't like. You are not protecting anyone, Mr. Sterling. You are endangering everyone." The words hit Rick harder than any physical blow could have. This wasn't just about his career anymore. This was about his entire identity. Agent Ramirez was taking a statement from Chloe Martinez, who was providing a devastating, detailed account of Rick's long-standing pattern of behavior. Her testimony was being recorded for use in federal court. "He's done this before," Chloe said quietly, her voice shaking with emotion. "Not the evidence planting, not that I know of, but the harassment. Mostly black passengers, some Hispanic families, Muslim travelers. He always found a reason to delay them, search them, make them feel uncomfortable and unwelcome." The investigation was now expanding beyond just Rick Sterling to include the entire airport administration that had protected and promoted him. Airport Director James Patterson arrived in a full-blown panic, immediately attempting to distance himself from the catastrophe. "Director Reed," he began, "we had no idea Mr. Sterling's behavior had escalated to this level." "You had 17 formal complaints," Director Reed replied coldly, holding up the file. "You had multiple documented incidents. You chose to ignore them. Now you have a federal civil rights investigation on your hands and potential criminal charges against your entire management team." As Agent Ramirez prepared to transport Rick for federal booking, she read him his rights. "Mr. Sterling, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law." As the Miranda rights were read, Rick Sterling finally completely understood that his 12-year reign of racist intimidation was over. The federal government was taking this case personally, and Dr. Julian Vance, the man he had tried to destroy, would now be the star witness who would ensure that Rick faced the full and devastating consequences of his crimes. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Atlanta was packed as Rick Sterling faced the final consequences of his actions. The case, United States versus Sterling, had become a landmark prosecution for civil rights violations in transportation security, drawing national media attention and setting legal precedents that would protect travelers for generations to come. U.S. District Judge Patricia Morrison, known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor, read the charges with the gravity they deserved. "Mr. Sterling, a jury of your peers has found you guilty on all counts: evidence tampering, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, violation of civil rights under color of authority, and conspiracy to violate civil rights." Rick sat slumped in his chair at the defendant's table, a broken, hollowed-out man. His expensive legal team had tried every defense imaginable, arguing over zealousness, claiming a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence against him had been an insurmountable mountain. The crystal-clear security footage, the dozens of cell phone videos, the damning testimony from passengers and staff, and the documented pattern of discrimination spanning years had sealed his fate from day one. "The evidence presented in this case," Judge Morrison continued, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "shows a systematic and malicious pattern of racial discrimination that violates the most fundamental principles of equal treatment under the law. Mr. Sterling, you abused your position of authority to terrorize innocent travelers based solely on the color of their skin." Dr. Julian Vance sat in the gallery, having provided 3 days of calm, professional, and devastating testimony about the incident and its broader implications for national aviation security. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Carter, had built an airtight case, presenting evidence of Rick's long history of abuse. The unauthorized evidence locker entries, the stark statistical disparities in his detentions, the buried complaints, and the management cover-up that had enabled it all. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Carter had argued during her powerful closing statements, "this wasn't a single mistake. This was a deliberate, sustained campaign of racial harassment that culminated in the defendant committing a shocking series of federal crimes against a federal inspector who was there to protect the public." "Mr. Sterling," Judge Morrison said, looking directly at him, You will serve 8 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. Furthermore, you are hereby permanently banned from any employment in transportation security, law enforcement, or any position of public trust or authority for the remainder of your life." A sob erupted from Rick's wife in the gallery. His children, now teenagers, refused to meet his gaze. The man who had once strutted through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with the arrogance of a king was being led away in handcuffs, his future reduced to a concrete cell. But the criminal conviction was only the beginning of the fallout. The Department of Transportation imposed a staggering $2.3 million fine on the airport for its systematic civil rights violations. Airport Director James Patterson and 3 other senior executives who had ignored the complaints were terminated. The entire security training program was scrapped and completely overhauled under strict federal oversight. The civil lawsuit, filed jointly by Dr. Julian Vance and 17 other passengers who had been targeted by Rick over the years, resulted in a $15 million settlement. But more importantly, it forced comprehensive nationwide reforms. Maria Santos, who had been promoted to airport director in the wake of the management purge, implemented new protocols that quickly became the national standard. Every search, every detention, every security interaction is now documented, recorded, and reviewed for bias, she announced. We have created an environment where discrimination simply cannot survive in the shadows. The new training program, developed in response to the case, was officially adopted by airports across the country. It was called the Vance Mandate, in honor of Julian's unwavering professionalism. It required mandatory implicit bias training, de-escalation techniques, and strict, transparent documentation procedures. Julian himself was promoted to Regional Director of Inspections and was now traveling the country implementing the new standards he had helped create. "The goal isn't just to prevent what happened to me," he said during congressional testimony. "It is to create a system where every single traveler, regardless of their background, is treated with dignity and respect." The case became a model for prosecuting discrimination in other federal agencies, its ripple effects extending far beyond aviation. 2 years after Rick Sterling's conviction, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a different place. It had become a symbol of how institutions can change for the better when they are held accountable. Dr. Julian Vance stood in the very same terminal where he had been humiliated and framed. But this time, he was the keynote speaker for the National Transportation Security Conference. The man Rick Sterling had tried to destroy was now training the entire industry. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Julian told the assembled directors of security. "But it does happen when good people decide they will no longer accept discrimination as the cost of doing business." The statistics told the story. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment at ATL had dropped by 94%. The airport was now a case study in how to build security practices that were both inclusive and effective. Have you ever witnessed an act of discrimination, big or small, and felt powerless to do anything about it? Have you seen someone treated unfairly because of their race, their religion, or just the way they look? The story of Julian Vance proves that speaking up matters. Recording what you see matters. Demanding accountability matters. Share your own experiences in the comments below. If you've witnessed injustice, tell us what happened. And if you've seen positive change in your own community, share that story too. Like this video if you believe that every single person deserves to be treated with equal dignity and respect. And subscribe for more true stories about ordinary people who fought for justice and, against all odds, won. Because when we stand together against discrimination, we all become safer, we all become stronger, and we all get a little closer to the world we want to live in.